Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Friday's episode of Trending. I'm Jaymie Ike. Today's show is brought to you by Red Life Therapy. For healing at a cellular level, head over to Red Life Devices and use code Ickonic for 10% off. In a land not too far away, Richard Willett is on as well. How are you doing this morning, Rich?
I'm good, thank you. I thought you were going to burst into In a Land Down Under, which was one of my favourite songs. I don't understand it. It's not Australia. But yeah, I'm good, thank you. Lovely to join you today at the end of the second week of Trending. And what a world we're living in, mate.
We certainly are. But as we've spoken about on the show previously, we need to kind of not revel, but enjoy the wins when they come. Things that we feel we've influenced. I mean the international we, the universal we. We've spoken a lot on the first 10 episodes of this about the grooming gangs and the covering up of them here in the UK and these calls for a national inquiry and the fact they're being rebutted. Well, this feels like a bit of a win. Yesterday, Home Secretary Yvette Cooper announced a national review. She didn't say national inquiry, said national review into these grooming gangs and the scale of them, the inadequacies of the original investigations into them and the complicit nature of the police and the councils, which given where we started just 10 to 14 days ago when we started this show, that seemed a long way away. So the fact that this has now been announced, I think it's no coincidence that the public pressure, whether that be online, whether that be in the media, has led to this decision. So let's just hear from the Home Secretary before we dive into this.
This government has now commissioned Baroness Louise Casey to instigate a rapid review to uncover the prevalence of this appalling crime across the country, with no holds barred in the way that we know that she will conduct this inquiry, to actually fill the gaps in the evidence rather than rerun the same questions without the evidence and the data that we badly need.
So I don't know what you think, Rich, but for me, this feels like this has been done to save face. And the way they've done it, calling it a national review rather than a national inquiry. And there is a couple of differences. The main one that I've been reading is to do with witnesses having to testify under oath, which they would do in a national inquiry. In this, they won't. And also a national inquiry can compel witnesses to be interviewed and to give evidence and so on, a little bit more than a national review. But the point is, a national review wasn't even on the table a week or so ago, and all of a sudden it's come about. And I don't think it's an accident that the pressure on them has been ramped up to the point they feel they needed to do something. So this feels like a sort of win to a degree, not a knockout victory, maybe a points victory where, they've conceded some ground where they didn't want to do any of this at all. So they've conceded some ground where they think, well, we can't get away with doing nothing, so we need to do something. Obviously, it's not the national inquiry which we've been pushing for, but it's something which is more than they were originally looking to give. So this feels like a bit of a game of chess that we should accept, and we should be happy that this has happened because of public pressure. So it just goes to show the power that the public have and the power that the court of public opinion has. When it comes to things like this, they will try and ignore us, but they can't if the pressure gets too much. What's your take on this, Rich?
I think that's a really good point, and a really important point is that shows you the power that we have as a nation. And obviously, Elon Musk is going to try and take credit for this. Yeah, but he's obviously only using it for his own political game. But I think, yes, obviously it's a win. I think people won't know the difference between an inquiry and a national review, because literally when you read the article, even in the BBC, it's hard to get your head around what the difference is, as you've just explained there. They're very slight differences. Some of the victims are happy about it, some aren't. I would say if you're a young 16, 17-year-old kid who's being groomed, you would find it very hard to understand what the difference is. And I think that's something that is a real issue here, is you've got people from a class acting in accordance with people from a different class, and we speak almost different languages. And that's why we try and bridge the gap with what we do. It's because you're almost speaking, it's like Tower of Babel. You're almost speaking different languages. Legalese and all of these things don't make sense. Not that they're supposed to make sense. That's the point. So I think, yes, it's a win, absolutely, and not to be a downer, but we should watch what they do with it, because they can weaponize anything. So my concern would be the way it was weaponized to pit the Christians against the Muslims, the British against the Pakistanis, and it will be used for that gain. So you just have to watch with these guys, because they're not got your best interest at heart. But so they'll give a little, but then they'll move the chessboard. As you say, it's a chess game. But yes, I mean, I work with Maggie Oliver, how many years ago? 8 years ago, 7 years ago now. And she was one of the only ones really speaking about this, but not using it as a political means to try and cause havoc at the time. And we spoke about certain other people when I was in a taxi with her driving around London, about some other people using it for, religious ends. And she was frustrated about that, because it was taken away from the point of the young girls and putting it on something that's just kind of different, and it was twisting it. So Maggie Oliver deserves a lot of credit for getting this through and pushing as she did many, many years ago, and we'll see where it goes from there. But yes, it's a win. Just watch what they do with your energy that you're putting into it.
100%. With things like this over the years. So if you look back to the inquiry into historic sexual abuse in Parliament, with politicians, with people around the BBC and Jimmy Savile and others, delay tends to be a really big tactic that they use. They just sort of kick the can. They'll announce something like this. Yeah, we're going to have an inquiry into this. Of course we do. And that kind of appeases people in the moment. And then people, will see this story today and go, great, they're doing it. We've done well. We've got them to do the inquiry. On to the next thing. And they don't then check in that 6 months later, that inquiry's actually done nothing. It's arrested nobody. It's found nothing. And in the case of the Operation U-Tree, I believe it was, that looked into the child abuse, they had about 6 different people heading it up, because people just kept resigning and moving on and moving on. And what I felt in that that inquiry in particular, is they deliberately appointed people that weren't fit for purpose and that the public wouldn't accept, because that bought them another 3 months to then appoint another person and then another person. And before you know it, how many people have been arrested and gone to jail as a result of that operation? Basically nobody. And before we move on, this just to announce who's running this. So this is being headed, this inquiry, by a veteran government troubleshooter, to use the words in this article, Baroness Louise Casey. Now, not going to proclaim to know too much about her background. However, if she is a veteran government troubleshooter, then she's been around the positions of power for a long time, the positions of influence for a long time. And if she's a civil servant, which she almost certainly is, she will have been involved in previous governments as well that knew this was going on and did nothing. So I would be very shocked if this inquiry actually brings to the surface a fraction of what there is to bring. But it's important that we take the win that they didn't even want to do this, yet they're doing it. So we don't accept that this is it and well done, on to the next thing, like I said, and allow them to then weasel their way out of actually doing this. We keep the pressure on, we keep the pressure on, we keep the pressure on, and don't stop until there is actually some arrests, some evidence coming out, and that people who have been silenced actually get the opportunity to be heard. Because this is step one of a win. It's certainly not the final whistle. Yeah. So this is an important first step, I would say.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point to make. And then you look into a sort of slightly deeper or more esoteric understanding of how these things work. And all of this legal stuff goes through the City of London and goes through Temple Bar, which is the temple, the round temple, the round church there, which is the Knights Templar. So this goes way back, how this is controlled. So these are groups within groups. If she's a baroness, you can tell straight away, you haven't got your knighthood yet, and neither have I. So it's obviously there at a certain level, and it all goes through Temple and the Temple Bar, and the Knights Templar is very much part of the legal system, which feeds into the Freemasons at the very top, the Christian Freemasons, which the Templars are. So just be aware that there's this whole other world going on in the background that controls elements of this, and I think that's very important that not many other people will bring to the table.
No, I agree. Just for people watching, Rich, that have not heard of the Temple and Temple Bar in London, opposite the Old Bailey, that street where basically the entrance to the City of London, is it? And where the head of the legal system, if you like, the belly of the beast is in the UK. What is the Temple, the 3 Temple Bars?
The free temple, there's just different jurisdictions, isn't it, in terms of different levels that you can work your way up, but they have to actually go to this round Knights Templar church that's still there, and they have to work their way up there. So to even get into that level, you are basically signing on to the City of London with their dragon symbology everywhere, their solar sun cross there. So it's a whole legal jurisdiction as well.
It's a messed up thing.
It's totally fair. I mean, I need to look into that more in terms of the actual hierarchy, but you work your way up from there, and it's a big club. It really, really is, and it feeds into every system, everything, and local councils and local Freemasons. So just be aware that, and the police, obviously, heavily, that there's another aspect to this going on in the background.
Yeah, absolutely. They're essentially, I think, the 3 temples in London: Inner Temple, Middle Temple, and Outer Temple. I think it is. Yep. There are kind of secret society groups of collections of lawyers that you have to be part of one of them really to get onto the big cases that really make the news and really things like this that you would be getting on. And that church Richard mentions, if any of you have watched the film The Da Vinci Code, you'll know that the church that we're talking about, and I'd urge you to go and take a look at that deeper. It's such a deep story, and it's difficult to get into it in 25 minutes in the morning because there's so much information. But if you're interested in that, then there's a lot of information to read on that subject out there. So where are we going from here, Rich? What have you got today?
Well, the first one I'm going to look at is to do with this AI. Now, this guy looked at this yesterday, and he put this into ChatGPT on its own to ask about the digital twin. Now, this was disturbing. This is coming from the horse's mechanical mouth. Your digital twin refers to a virtual representation of a model of yourself built using data from various sources, such as your physical characteristics, behaviors, preferences, activities, and potential, even your thoughts. So this is what all this data is being harvested into your digital twin. Obviously, your Facebook, social media posts, everything's going into this to build your meta version of yourself. This is exactly what it is. But what was even more disturbing, and we know that stuff that's happening, but it all seems a bit kind of, all right, it looks a bit computer gamey, at the moment. Key features of a digital twin: it's data driven. It's a simulation. It can predict your behavior. This is where your pre-crime comes in. Makes decisions based on your preferences, or even automate tasks for you, which is where your 060606 Bill Gates patent will come in, where you're given digital Bitcoin for compliance, basically rat on the wheel. Who might own or control your digital twin? This is important. You, in theory. Remember, this is coming from ChatGPT itself. So that's how it's been taught. You, in theory. Ideally, as the subject of the digital twin, you should have control and ownership of how your data is collected, used, and shared. However, here we go. This isn't always the case in practice. This is a computer telling you this. Corporations and developers, companies that create digital twin platforms may hold significant control over the digital twin. So remember, if all of your online world is where you're basically feeding into the real world in terms of your finances, how you eat, they're controlling that digital twin. So they can lock that digital twin in a prison for 6 months. And regardless whether you're physically in prison or not, you can't do anything in the real world. Yeah. You can see what they're trying to do here. They're creating a sub-world, a matrix within a matrix. Rights holder of a digital twin, so the rights to it. The specific rights holder of a digital twin can vary depending on the legal framework. Here we go again. What does that mean? And platform that governs the creation and usage of that twin. Well, if you've got an everything app, which Elon Musk wants to bring out, it's only one governing body. It's insane. So go and have a look at this at davidicke.com. It's absolutely fascinating. Introducing your digital twin, the usurper of your sovereign self. You are creating a digital world. I mean, it's a digital version of your birth certificate anyway, which gets floated on the stock exchange. So there's an element of this has been around already. But you won't need to physically go to prison if you're locked out.
Yeah, just lock you out of the world. You can't eat. You can't get a house. You can't get a job. You can't. And they're already kind of doing that to some people who are threats to the system. Places like China are further ahead than others in terms of that. And you've had situations, I think, where, what they call rogues of the state, or people who stand up against the state, well, firstly get taken out, a lot of them, in certain places. But I was reading a story earlier this week that they have big billboards with their faces on, shaming them and stuff like that. They can't go into, they can't leave the country. That's a big one. They're not allowed to, have all the fruits of labour, if you like, that people are having that toe the party line. So yeah, it's a really dangerous precedent, a really, really dangerous precedent. And I think what I find, Rich, is people say, when you expose and when you highlight the dangers of AI and the dangers of the fact that our relationship with technology has gone too far, it's gone from, in many cases, being the servant to being the master. And it has for so many people, particularly the young. If you take an example like, a smartphone here, how many of the smartphones in young people's hands control them, not the other way around, in terms of not being able to put them down, in terms of the influence that the various different social media sites have over their perception, have over their psychology, all those things. So the control has gone too far. But you get accused when you raise these issues of being, you're in the dark ages. We've got to move with the times. Things have got to progress. But I don't see any of these things, and that story being one, and we covered some earlier this week about AI as well, that's progress. How are they making anyone's life better? Things like bionic legs for people that can't walk. That makes life better for them. That's amazing. That's unbelievable technology. People have walked, seen, listened, heard, lived that wouldn't have lived before this. So it definitely has some place. You're 200 miles away and we're talking over the internet. People are watching this show all around the world. Technology has a place, yes. But with things like this, it's just got so out of hand. And when you've got, James Bond villains like Musk and others that are the ones at the head of it and controlling the direction it goes in, it's not a good way for humanity to move forward. And you talk about progress and evolution and being at the cutting edge of human knowledge and technological development. Well, I think we've gone backwards, actually, in terms of its positive impact on humanity. And those stories you just mentioned there, the amount of things that can be wrong with that. You can lock people out, for one. You can blackmail the hell out of people because of what they've done online, 20 years ago. Because as Gaz said, I think earlier in the week, the internet always keeps receipts. Nothing's ever really gone. And, the dangers of that are so high. And it really shocks me that more people don't at least acknowledge that there's another side to this. It's not all great. Here's the iPhone 25. It drives my car for me. It's not all good.
No, not at all. I mean, you don't want Elon Musk controlling your bionic legs. I mean, it's all right having some bionic legs, but you want to be in control. You might do, or into a wall. It's whoever controls it is the issue here. It's not the technology as much itself. It's whoever's controlling your bionic legs. You want to control your bionic legs. You don't want them to. So it's one of those things. Is quite obviously it's whoever becomes the god of that technology, whoever controls that technology. And obviously now Musk is way down there. But look at the guys he's hanging out with. Saudi royals are funding him. You want the Saudi royals to control your bionic legs? I'm using bionic legs throughout this whole interview, by the way, or this whole episode. But if you want the Saudi royals to be controlling them, you want Habad Lubavitch to be controlling them, with Jared Kushner was with him in the Qatar. Look at the people that surround themselves. You want Netanyahu controlling you. These are the people, and even them are not really the people, as we know.
They're still just the gophers, aren't they?
They're just gophers. So the technology is one thing. But again, it's in the wrong hands, and we all know that. And that's really worrying when they're putting the stuff out there. And you're asking, don't forget, you're asking the computer itself what it's been designed to do. And then it's convincing you. If you look down that article, and I didn't get to that bit because it'd be too long-winded, it says that it's inevitable that these things will come about. Absolutely. Have a look at that. That's the same message that Elon Musk's saying. AI is inevitable. No, it's not. It's not inevitable. We're putting it. We're making it. We're feeding it. So, but the computer itself already is telling you that it's inevitable. So it's been programmed to tell you that it's inevitable to program you. It's the wrong way round. If everyone knows about cybernetics, it's the study of systems. Have a look into that because it shows you how they create these new systems.
Yeah, completely agree. Inevitability comes when something is out of control. It's out of human control. What you choose to develop and build and add on and implement, that's not inevitable. That's decisions. It's like I think it was me and you last Friday when we were talking about prophecies, saying, well, there's not a prophecy when you make it happen by your decisions. That's just your decisions. That's cause and effect. Same with this. Continuing to develop this technology to the point that it becomes its own entity, which I feel like we are probably, certainly in the underground bases, at that level already where AI is conscious. And that's not a, inevitability, that's a decision. And, Musk, all those years ago, when he was still pretending to oppose AI, was saying that, AI could be a danger to humanity, but we must merge with it to protect ourselves. Well, that basically is saying, hey, you see that car that's going 100 miles an hour, jump out in front of it to stop it hitting you. Well, great shout.
Yeah, exactly.
It's probably not ideal. And even this week, you've had Russell Brand coming out saying that we need to have a relationship with AI or it may turn Luciferian. He's obviously had his instructions and the next bandwagon he's going to be jumping on. So we're gonna move on to this story because it's very relevant with the Prime Minister of the UK over in Kiev yesterday. So yesterday they've signed the UK and Ukraine have signed a 100-year support pact, which by support pact means the UK giving them money. Basically, that's what it really means. But again, like we said at the top of the show, the opposition to that. The amount of money being given, same in America, the amount of money being given over to Ukraine, when at the same time you're cutting winter fuel payments, when at the same time you've got veterans on the street in all these Western countries, and at the same time the cost of living is going up. It is starting to rile people up. It started with a small group going, this is wrong, but that's getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So they're having to reword, rebadge, and reshape how these things are happening to try and circumvent that public opinion turning. So apologise, I'm a bit sniffly this morning. So yeah, this is the story. Keir Starmer has pledged to put Ukraine in the strongest possible position on a trip to Kiev when he signed a landmark 100-year pact with the war-stricken country. The Prime Minister's visit on Thursday was at one point marked by loud blasts, which apparently Zelensky joked, that's Russia's way of saying hello. Well, I'm not sure I'd be that calm if bombs were going off in my place. I'd probably be worried that people were dying, but that's just him. So Keir Starmer said the apparent air raid greeted him in Kiev was a reminder of the daily attacks and the resolve of the Ukrainian people. We're with you, not just today, not just for the next year, but for the next 100 years, long after this terrible war is over. He also refused to rule out UK troops on Ukrainian soil fighting in this. And as well as that, the same week we've seen attacks from Ukraine into Russian territory using British and American missiles. That was exposed and highlighted on Tuesday this week. It's just stepping up, ramping up. We've been talking about since day one when this conflict began that they were trying to bring about a position where the fault lines were drawn to bring about this Third World War, this conflict that has been long written about. Anyone that hasn't heard of the Albert Pike letters, I would advise you to take a look at those when the three world wars were detailed. And the Third World War talked about using the East versus the West, which we're seeing as you see the alliances between Russia, China, North Korea, Iran, and so on, and then everybody else in the Western NATO countries. And this has been further amplified by this conflict. And again, no talk of diplomacy, no talk of peace, no talk of ending the conflict. It's just a continuation of a black hole of money going to Ukraine, which nobody seems to know where that goes, more weapons, more death, and more suffering on both sides, which, if you are a politician, if you are a genuine statesman and a leader of a nation, you want the opposite of that for your people. You want to bring them peace, prosperity, and happiness. You don't want to bring them conflict, poverty, and stress and trauma, which is exactly what's happening across various different countries, which just again goes to show that none of these leaders actually have their best interests at heart. But this kind of feels, Rich, doesn't it, that it's been teed up for Trump to come in, probably similar with what we're seeing in the Israel-Gaza ceasefire. It's being teed up for him to come in. I mean, he spoke right through his campaign about how he'd sort this war out in 15 minutes. So would it shock you if he comes in and it's all sorted, but it's already been sorted, it's prearranged, and then he looks like this hero and it gets him off to a great start in the eyes of people? Or do you think there's something different at play?
Well, there's two pathways there. As you said, the East versus West has been put into this for a long time. So Christopher John Biotis is on my show this week, talks about the Leviathan versus the Behemoth. They take these biblical texts, which is a mutually destructive war, East versus West. And there's another character called Ziz, which is like a hawk type character that picks off the remains. And I wonder what that hawk-like character could represent. So that's been planned. That's part of these biblical prophecies. Now, guys, have a look at the Habadnik guys. I know I bang on about this so much because Zelensky is in with them. Putin has been brought up by them. And Donald Trump, through Jared Kushner, is in with them. This is why this group is so important and what they believe, their Kabbalistic beliefs of their new world order or their world to come. So what he might go in and he might squash it for a little while, but they need it to happen.
Yep.
So when you're talking about 100 years, all you're doing is setting up. I mean, imagine being in Ukraine or Russia and going 100 years. So automatically you go, this is going on for 100 years. Like this is the rest of my life and my kids' life. So they're basically telling you to get used to it. So I think he'll come in and maybe lower some of the things for a little while and he'll just gradually creep up again. But they need this to happen for their messianic agenda. And it is a messianic agenda. And there's no way that you can look at a group like Chabad Lubavitch and understand that their outcomes are Solomon's Temple. It's plans for Greenland, which will be their new Garden of Eden. It's plans for their new world to come, which is their Sabbath. If you can look into what they believe and then realize that Putin, Zelensky, and Malay and Trump, Dershowitz, RFK Jr. are all involved with this group. So it's like this group are involved with a cult that have got an end times prophecy. That's exactly what it is. Then you realize that this isn't meant to stop. This is all part of the agenda, and it's East versus West. It's a mutually destructive war. So this even relates back to what we were talking about earlier with the grooming gangs being used to weaponize the East versus West war. And that's what I'm concerned about. So it all does tie in. As your dad says, it's not, I don't see conspiracies everywhere. It's with one conspiracy with a lot of different tentacles all over the place because they all interlink.
Yeah, I mean, what this kind of reminds me of, if Trump comes in and it calms down slightly, it reminds me of the situation a decade or so ago in Iran. Now, if you remember, it was really, heavy and hot between Iran and the West for a long time. And then under the Obama administration, they signed the Iran nuclear deal, if you remember that. People watching will probably remember that. I think it was signed in around 2010, 2011, something like that. And at the time, then people came out and were saying, look, see, what you've been saying about them using Iran and this conflict is wrong. Look, it's all peaceful. Trump comes in, rips that deal up, and basically now the US and Iran have already exchanged a few missiles against each other. Israel and Iran have exchanged a few missiles against each other. And it all of a sudden goes from looking very calm to looking very, an increased chance of conflict very quickly. Same with Russia. Like when I was growing up, just a decade ago, there was no chance of a war with Russia. Russia were an ally. Yeah. It was becoming, they had the World Cup in 2018. It was becoming a bit of a, that Cold War times are gone. And then all of a sudden, one thing happens and you're back to where you were. So if Trump comes in and it calms down, don't by any means let that lure you into a false sense of security that it's going to stay like that. Because like you just pointed out, Rich, 100 years, that's 2 generations. It's a long time. And, even our kids are unlikely to see the end of that agreement. So it's it just goes to show that they play the long game. They definitely play the long game. So short term, it might look like it's quietening down. But in the long term, it's certainly not. Because as you say, it's part of the agenda and they need it to happen. So what's your final story, mate?
So I'd just like to add to that, just at the very end, because a lot of people won't speak about these kind of subjects that are off in the background. And you've got the front, but this group of guys that want this end times to come there's one set of them believe that it should have ended in 2000. But the other ones are 2,240, I believe, roundabout time span to get this stuff done. And I know it sounds mad, but these people are a cult. Remember, and it goes into the Jesuits, goes into the top level of the Freemasons, this goes into the Habadniks. This is an end times agenda. And just look around you. It involves AI, it involves Solomon's Temple. So just have a look that they're on a time scale. So in that terms, 9/11, Revelations 9/11, and I'm not religious in any way, shape or form, but I look into these things, was the end times coming in. It was the opening of the bottomless pit. This is Abaddon. So what happened was now we've got Donald Trump, who's the 9/11 president. He was the 45th 9 and the 47th 11. He's the 9/11 president. They always tell you. So I just wanted to add that because I want to get people to start reading the subtext of these things, because there is a code to this. And once you can get people to start to recognize it and read it, the game's over for them, because that's how they communicate.
Yeah, there's much deeper stories behind all of these things that we talk about, and it would be impossible to dive into them in half an hour and give them justice. But as Rich points out, there's so much information out there to dive into it deeper. If we want to see these end times, then Rich, we're going to have to go to the light and come back a few times to see 2,240. But I'm not sure I'd fancy
Well, we'll stop them.
We'll
stop them before then.
We'll stop.
Yeah, we'll stop them. That's what we're here for. This last one then. So Anthony Blinken, he was shouted down a couple of times, I believe, Jay, this week in his talks. But this one was by Max Blumenthal. And there's a good video here. There's also a YouTube video version, so we can have a look at one or the other. But you can hear him in the background on everything he's saying. I mean, literally, Anthony is blinking into the sunlight here, terrified.
It is the most necessary thing.
300 reporters in Gaza were on the receiving end of your bombs. Why did you keep the bombs flowing when we had a deal in May?
I'm happy to address
questions.
questions.
We all knew we had a deal. Everyone in this room knows we had a deal, Tony, and you kept the bombs flowing.
I'm happy to address
Why did you
questions when we get a
sacrifice the
chance. Thank you.
rules-based order on the mantle of your commitment to Zionism? Why did you allow my friends to be massacred? Are you compromised by Israel? Why did you allow the Holocaust of our time to happen?
So there you saw it. And I mean, Max Blumenthal, just money on the head there, hit everything, every point of him being complicit in this genocide. And what a lot of people don't know from this image here, you'll see that Anthony Blinken's stepson, which is very interesting of itself, stepfather, Samuel Pazar, was the lawyer and confidant and longtime friend of Robert Maxwell. Right. So there is a connection there between Epstein. Yeah, Epstein and Anthony Blinken. And even Max shouts out there, "Are you compromised?" So, it's a really, really interesting time because people are picking up on this stuff, Jay.
Yeah, they certainly are. It's coming to the surface. I was having this chat with my dad this morning, that it feels like, because we were talking about Israel breaking the ceasefire in Lebanon this morning, and we were saying that what it feels like is the court of public opinion that they used to pay lip service to a little bit more, they're almost not as bothered about it now because they're sprinting for the finish line. Mm-hmm. And to use the sporting analogy, when you sprint for the finish line or when you go all out, technique goes out the window and you make mistakes. You fall over, you trip up because you're basically, you've stopped thinking, you're just sprinting for the line. And as a result, there's a lot more things to highlight, to expose. There's a lot more people seeing things that weren't seeing it before because it's becoming more obvious and in your face. So I think, we do live in interesting times. We live in very interesting times. And I think, we're going to see more of this as time goes on. More and more of this as we go through the year because, many people have predicted 2025 is going to be a very spicy year in many different ways. And we're 17 days into it. And, wherever you are in the world, look at what's happened already. We're 17 days in.
Yeah.
So it's going to get really interesting as we go through the year. So it's certainly not one for the faint-hearted. And it's one to be really discerning about the information that you see and making sure that you see all sides of something before you form an opinion. That's very, very important because, as we know, Rich, in times of increased events, increased, things they want you to believe, the propaganda reaches fever pitch, just like it did through COVID. They get more aggressive with it. So in these types of situations, it's even more important to get both sides because they will relentlessly just give you theirs more aggressively than they do even now. So before we finish up, Rich, what have you got going on tonight? What's on Classified tonight if people wanted to tune into that?
So on Classified tonight, I'm speaking about the secret word of the Royal Arch Freemasons, which is kind of like the fourth level you get to in some aspects. It's such a wide, varied kind of thing, Freemasonry. So they've got a secret word for God. So I'll be talking about that and what that is. And they've actually changed it now but they say they've changed it. It's all very convoluted and confusing. And then I've got Christopher John Biotis on to talk about why Trump is so obsessed with Greenland. And it's absolutely fascinating, fits in with the research I'm doing. So that's tonight on Ickonic.com.
Awesome. Well, if you want to go deeper, then tune into that. Also, this Sunday, we've got the release of a brand new show, Bring the Fire. First episode we're going to make free here on X as well as on Ickonic. Gareth sits down with Raja Maya, who is a massive community leader when it comes to exposing the Pakistani grooming gangs in the north of England. So if you're interested in that subject and want to know more about names, dates, places, the people that have covered this up, and just how prolific this is and how big and wide this goes, then that's a fascinating interview. You know, I sat down and directed it when we shot it last week, and it's earlier in the week, and it was absolutely mind-blowing. So I urge you to tune into that as well. Thanks for your time this morning, Rich. It's a pleasure as always, mate. You'll be back on Wednesday, I believe, with Gareth.
Sounds right.
Absolutely. I'll be back on Monday with Gareth. Until then, have a fantastic weekend, everybody. Thanks for tuning in and for your support as always. Take care.